The 5 most haunted places in the world. A haunted house is a home that is perceived as being inhabited by disembodied spirits of the deceased, who may have been former residents or were familiar with the property. There are millions of haunted homes around the world. But here are what I think are 5 extremely creepy cases where the undead haven't left home. Monte, Homestead, Australia, this historic house in June. Australia has seen its fair share of evil since his construction in 1885. The Crawley family were the first residents, and during this time the family laid witness to many deaths, including the tragic death of a young woman who was dropped down the stairs a.m. to the family is believed to have fallen from the balcony, and a stable boy apparently burned to death on the property. There was also a mentally ill man named Harold, who was chained up in the caretaker's cottage on the property. For 40 years he was found cured up next to the body of his dead mother and sent to a mental institute where he died shortly after the tragedy. Doesn't end with the Crawleys. After the house was left in 1948, it was taken over by a group of caretakers, one of whom was murdered in the caretaker's cottage, with the killer never being found. Since all of these terrible events, all the new residents have reported seeing ghostly figures, strange lights, invisible force fields, phantom sounds, and animal mutilations that have no explanation to this day. The Monte Cristo homestead is considered the most haunted house in Australia. Borvettnet, the haunted vicarage, Sweden. Borvettnet is a small village in Jamlack country, North Sweden, and in its location is the most haunted home in Sweden. The home was built in 1876, and its first paranormal incident was documented in 1927, when the residents reported many strange happenings, including one particular encounter with something paranormal. He was on his way up into the attic to gather his laundry when he witnessed his laundry being torn down from the line by an unseen force. Rudolf Tangen, a priest who lived at the Vicar during the 1930s, saw an old woman dressed in gray appearing a room. He followed her as she walked away, but she vanished in front of his eyes. In the 1940s, a man and his wife said they had several paranormal experiences in the house, including unexplained sounds and moving objects. On one occasion, a woman who was staying in the guest room was awoken in the middle of the night to see 3 old women sitting there staring at her. She quickly turned on the light and they were still looking at her. However, they now appeared blurry and soon vanished without sight. In 1945, Eric Lindgren moved into the home, and he began a journal recounting many of his own experiences. In the house, he reported being thrown out of his chair regularly by an unseen force. The current building is serving as a restaurant as well as a guest house, and if you're brave enough to stay there, you receive an overnight stay certificate to prove it. The White House, Washington, D.C., USA, probably the most famous house. But not many people know that the White House is said to be the home of not just the President of America. And with this incredible history and historical residence, it's no wonder it's had its fair share of paranormal stories and is considered one of the most haunted homes in the United States. During a visit to the White House, Winston Churchill, a former UK Prime Minister, was staying in the Lincoln bedroom. He had just finished bathing and walked into his room, where he saw Lincoln standing by the fireplace. He refused to sleep in that room again. After that night, other people that have said they have seen the ghost of Abraham Lincoln include presidents Teddy Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, and D. Eisenhower, First Ladies Jackie Kennedy and Lady B. Bird Johnson, and presidential children Susan Ford and Mean Regan Mean, and her husband both witnessed Lincoln standing by the same fireplace where Churchill had once seen him. Queen Wilma of the Netherlands also had an encounter with Lincoln when a knock on the door in the middle of the night. When she answered, she was confronted by the ghost of Abraham Lincoln standing in the hallway, who vanished before her eyes. President Andrew Jackson is believed to haunt the Rose Room, with numerous White House employees reportedly hearing his hearty laugh, or him in a fit of rage, swearing violently. The ghost of Abigail Adams has also been seen floating through the East Room. This is apparently the room in which she used to hang her laundry, and several eyewitnesses, including staff and visitors, have seen her seemingly float across the room with her arms outstretched as if she was carrying a laundry basket. Various other spirits have also been seen, and sudden cold spots disembodied. Footsteps, voices, knocks, and screams are frequently reported at the seemingly very haunted 1600 home, 50 Berkeley Square, a large Victorian house on Berkeley Square, Mayfair in central London, is thought to be the oldest unaltered building in London and also holds another status. It's the most haunted home in the city, and quite possibly the UK. The legendary tales vary, but a few that stand out are the strange goings-on in the attic, said to be haunted by a spirit of a young woman who committed suicide there. She supposedly threw herself from the top floor, windows after being abused by her uncle, and legend hazard. Her ghost has resulted in several people being frightened to death. Another tale is that of a young man who was locked in the attic and fed only through a hole in the floor until he eventually went mad and died in the Victorian era when being occupied by George Canning. He claimed to have heard strange noises and had numerous paranormal experiences whilst living there after George Canning's residency. In 1885, the house was bought by a Mr. Myers in the late 1800s after a breakup with his fiancée. It was said that Mr. Myers would lock himself in the attic room and slowly went mad over the rest of his life during his stay at the house. It fell into gross despair, and the haunted reputation began to grow as a bet. Lord Lyttelton stayed a night in the building's attic. He brought his shotgun with him, and during the night fired at an apparition which had appeared in the morning. He attempted to find what he had shot at, but could only find shotgun cartridges. The next year, the local council brought a summons to the house's owner for failure to pay taxes, but due to the house's reputation as haunted, they were let off in the late 1800s. Mayfair reported that a maid who stayed in the attic room had gone mad. It was later reported that she died in asylum the day after. On the day she was found, a nobleman took up the challenge to spend a night in the house. He unexpectedly died that night, and the coroner pronounced his death was caused by extreme fright. Another nobleman spent the night in the attic room, and he too was affected by whatever is living up there. It was said he was so paralyzed with fear that he couldn't speak. In 1887, sailors from HMS Penelope stayed a night in the house. By morning, one was found dead, having tripped as he ran from the house. The other reported having seen the ghost of Mr. Myers coming at them aggressively. No phenomena has been reported since the house was finally bought by the Maggs brothers in the mid-1930s. But people say they just don't want the publicity of only one of the world's most haunted houses. It was a best-selling book, and in 1973 was made into a blockbuster movie that scared millions around the world. So much so that viewers were passing out with fear in the cinema. But worse yet, it was based on a true story. The Exorcist. A young girl is possessed by the devil, and a lengthy exorcism is taken place by two priests in order to banish the devil from a body. But the real story is far more terrifying. In 1949, a 14-year-old boy named Roland was said to be possessed by a demonic force after taking part in several Ouija ward sessions. The case of Roland is one of the most well-documented cases of demonic possession ever recorded, and it all started in Roland's house in St. Louis, Missouri, America, after his Ouija board session. Squeaking and marching feet could clearly be heard on the floorboards, and furniture moved by itself, objects levitated, and on one account, a container of holy water placed near Roland violently smashed to the ground. Scratches also began to be carved into his flesh by unseen claws. This was all witnessed by his family and the priests. The demon that was said to be taking over the young boy was attempted to be removed at the house by performing an exorcism, but was unsuccessful, and during the exorcism the boy slipped one of his hands out of the restraints he had been put in and slashed the priest's arms with a bedspring. Roland was finally ridden of whatever was controlling him and lived on to have a successful career and became a loving father and granddad, never to speak of the past events. But since the boy and his family left the house, all new occupants have ran into extreme bad luck, which is said to be linked to the evil still lurking there.